Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. Carl Jung.
When you hear the words, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes, something shifts. It does not sound like advice. It sounds like a warning, and perhaps an invitation. Most of us spend our lives searching outside of ourselves. We are taught to measure our worth in the eyes of others, to chase approval, to wear the masks that will keep us loved, safe, or admired. Out there, in the world of noise and reflection, it feels as though life has meaning, if only we can keep up with its demands. But the truth hidden in Jung's words is far more unsettling, that this outward search is a dream, and like all dreams, it eventually dissolves. Awakening, however, is something else entirely. To awaken is not to gather more, but to risk losing what you thought you were. To awaken is to turn inward, into silence, into the shadows that hide behind your carefully built identity. It is to face the parts of yourself you have avoided, denied, or buried under the weight of performance. And when you step into that territory, there is no applause, no audience, only you. What you are about to hear is not simply a story. It is a mirror, one that reflects a path you may have glimpsed in your own life, but chosen not to follow. This path does not promise comfort. It promises honesty. It does not promise happiness. It promises truth. So lean closer. Listen carefully. This is the story of a dream that shattered an identity, and of an awakening that could only come through descent. There was once a man who lived in a city made entirely of mirrors. Everywhere he turned, his reflection followed him. When he walked down the street, the glass windows of tall buildings multiplied his image. When he crossed the river at dawn, the surface rippled with another face of his own. Even in the quiet of his home, the polished surfaces of metal and glass gave him back versions of himself he had grown used to seeing. In these countless reflections, the man wore many different faces. To his employers, he wore the mask of competence, nodding, smiling, showing only what was expected. To his friends, he wore the mask of charm, laughing at the right moments, concealing his heaviness. To his family, he wore the obedient mask, dutiful, agreeable, hiding the parts of himself that might disappoint. Each face was carefully adjusted to fit its moment, like costumes hanging in a vast wardrobe of expectations. At first, this life felt manageable, even successful. The world of mirrors seemed to reward him for his flexibility. He was admired, respected, even envied. But slowly, the man began to feel something strange. Each time he passed a mirror, he felt less certain of which reflection was truly his. His image fractured into so many versions that he no longer knew which belonged to him. The more he looked outside, the less he recognized himself within. And then the dreams began. At night, he found himself wandering through corridors where the mirrors no longer reflected him. Instead, they dissolved into fog. Behind the fog stood figures, vague, familiar, waiting. He would always wake before he reached them, but the feeling remained when he opened his eyes. A whisper, an insistence, that something inside was calling him back. One night, the dream was different. The man found himself standing in the same corridor of fog, endless and silent. But this time his steps felt heavier, as if the ground itself resisted him. He walked for what felt like hours, until, at last, he saw it. A single mirror, standing alone in the mist. Unlike the others, this one was not whole. A jagged crack ran across its surface, like lightning frozen in glass. He hesitated. All his life, he had relied on mirrors to confirm who he was, to give him back a face, an image, a role to cling to. But this mirror unsettled him. Its fractured reflection revealed not one self, but many, each distorted. One eye smiled with forced confidence. Another eye seemed hollow, tired. One mouth curved upward in charm, while another twisted downward in grief. It was as if all the masks he had ever worn had gathered in one place, demanding to be seen at once. Drawn by something deeper than reason, he lifted his hand and touched the cracked surface. In an instant, the mirror shattered, not outward but inward, as if the glass had been a door all along. The shards fell away into blackness, and he was pulled through. The fall was endless. No ground, no light, no familiar walls of the city to anchor him. Only a descent into something vast and unknown. He tried to scream, but his voice echoed back in silence. He realized then, the dream was no longer a dream. This was not imagination. This was him, plunging into the very core of his being. And for the first time in his life, he understood. He had crossed a threshold that could never be reversed. I remember the sensation vividly. It was not like falling through air, but like sinking through layers of myself. The deeper I went, the heavier I became, as though every forgotten memory clung to me, pulling me down. There was no light, only a dense darkness, pressing against my skin like water at the bottom of the sea. At first, I panicked. I reached for the familiar masks, the smile that earned approval, the clever words that impressed strangers, the quiet obedience that kept me safe. But none of them appeared. They had dissolved, stripped away as easily as paper in fire. I was left with nothing to hide behind, nothing to carry but my own raw presence. And then came the voices. They did not speak in words, but in echoes. My failures murmured through the dark like ghosts. The promises I had broken returned, whispering of betrayal. The moments I had been cruel, or cowardly, or silent when I should have spoken. Each rose from the depths, circling me like shadows. I tried to shut them out, to deny them. But the more I resisted, the louder they became. I felt the walls of my chest tighten. I wanted to escape back to the city of mirrors, to the comforting illusion where reflections could protect me from the truth. But there was no way back. The fall had closed the door. In that abyss, I realized what terrified me most. It was not the darkness, nor the voices, but the possibility that this was who I truly was. Not the faces I had shown the world, but the broken fragments I had hidden within. And in that moment, I understood the cost of awakening. To stand face to face with the parts of myself I had long abandoned. In the cavern of silence, the man finally saw him. At first it was only a silhouette, moving just beyond reach. A shape cut from the same darkness that surrounded him. But as the figure drew closer, the man recognized something unsettling. It was him, not the polished him that the mirrors once reflected, but another version entirely. His posture was heavier, his eyes darker, his face unguarded, carrying grief, envy, anger, and hunger. Everything he had ever denied now stood before him. The shadow did not speak with words. Yet its presence spoke louder than any voice. It said, "I am the part of you that you feared. I am your shame, your rage, your longing. I am every impulse you buried to appear acceptable. You built a city of mirrors to exile me. But here, there are no mirrors. Here there is only truth." The man recoiled. His instinct was to fight, to prove he was not this darkness. That he was better, purer, worthy of light. He shouted, accused, even begged the shadow to disappear. But the shadow remained still, unbothered. Every strike he made landed against himself. For there was no separation, The shadow was his reflection, bound to him by threads older than memory. Days passed, or perhaps years. Time lost its measure in the cavern. Exhausted, broken, the man finally sat down in silence. The shadow sat across from him, patient, eternal, and in the stillness, he understood. The shadow was not his enemy. It was his orphan self, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting to be embraced. When he stopped resisting, something shifted. The shadow stepped forward, and instead of swallowing him whole, it dissolved into him, as though it had been his missing blood all along. For the first time, he felt a faint light in the cavern, not from above, but from within. Carl Jung once wrote that, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The man's encounter with his shadow is not a fantasy. It is a symbol of what every human being must eventually face. When Jung speaks of awakening, he does not mean rising into some radiant, perfect version of ourselves. He means the opposite, turning toward the parts of our soul we have hidden, feared, abandoned. Looking outside, as Jung says, is dreaming. It is the city of mirrors, where every reflection is carefully arranged to show us what we wish to see, or what others wish to see in us. These outer images may grant us approval, admiration, even temporary happiness, but they are not real. They are fragile projections, collapsing the moment life demands something deeper from us. Looking inside, however, is a descent, not into fantasy, but into reality. To awaken is to enter the cavern, to hear the voices of our shame and grief, to stand before the shadow we spent years avoiding. Awakening is not comfortable. It is not a blissful meditation, or a sudden vision of light. It is often painful, disorienting, even terrifying, because it strips us of illusions. Yet in this very stripping lies the gift. The man in the story did not find light outside of himself. He found it only after he allowed the shadow to return home. The faint glow that appeared in the cavern did not come from above, nor from some savior. It came from within, from the reunion of what had been divided. This is the paradox of awakening. What we fear most, our darkness, is the very key that unlocks our light. To become whole, we must carry both. To awaken, we must be willing to descend. When I finally rose from that cavern, I did not emerge as someone reborn in fire and light. I emerged quieter, slower, almost uncertain, but carrying something I had never felt before: wholeness. For so long, I had chased an image of myself out in the world, polishing my reflection in the mirrors of approval, success, and belonging. But those images were brittle, shattered the moment life struck against them. Now I carried something different. The voices that once haunted me no longer had the same grip. They were still there, the memories of failure, the impulses I once despised. But instead of tearing me apart, they felt like old companions. I could see them for what they were: pieces of me, not enemies. For the first time, I did not need to fight myself. Stepping back into the world was not easy. The city of mirrors still stood, dazzling, inviting me to lose myself again in reflections. People still expected me to wear the same masks, to play the same roles. And sometimes, I did. But something within me had shifted. The masks no longer defined me. They were tools, not prisons. Behind them, I could feel the steady pulse of the self I had reclaimed in the dark. Awakening did not make me perfect. It did not erase my flaws. But it gave me the courage to carry them with honesty, rather than hide them in shame. I began to notice the subtle freedom that came from no longer needing to be flawless or endlessly admired. I did not need every mirror to show me who I was, because I had glimpsed it within. And once you have seen that light inside yourself, however faint, the illusions outside lose their power to control you. Awakening is not a single event. It is not a moment where everything suddenly becomes clear, and the rest of life unfolds in peace. Awakening is a rhythm, a cycle of forgetting and remembering, of losing yourself in the dream outside, and returning again to the silence within. The man's journey through the cavern, his meeting with the shadow, his discovery of the inner light. It is not a story of escape, but of integration. To look outside is to live in borrowed images. To look inside is to face the raw material of your soul. Both are necessary, but only one can lead to truth. Jung's words remind us that dreaming is easy. Awakening demands courage. For in dreams, we are flattered, distracted, entertained. But in awakening, we are confronted with ourselves. Unedited, unmasked, undeniable. And yet, this confrontation is the path to freedom. To know your shadow is to stop being controlled by it. To welcome your grief is to release its grip. To accept your flaws is to end the endless war with yourself. When you awaken, you do not become someone new. You become someone whole. So when I recall the dream that shattered my identity, I understand now that it was never a punishment. It was an invitation to stop running from myself, to step into the cavern, to carry what I had once abandoned. And though it broke me, it also rebuilt me, in a way the mirrors of the world never could. I leave you with this truth. The dream ends when you awaken, and the awakening begins the moment you dare to look within.